Hello and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today I want to talk about the Mittlehau, specifically the Mittlehau from offense and then the Mittlehau from defense. And particularly I want to talk about its strengths and weaknesses and what I see as primarily a bunch of weaknesses with only one real strength. So we'll watch the clip first.
Nice.
And what I'm talking about with the Mittlehau is specifically after I parry this thrust. I raise my sword above my head, essentially feinting a high cut. My opponent responds by going up into a cron, and then upon realizing that they've picked the wrong side as to what side I'm attacking on, they attempt to kind of windshield wiper their sword back. While that is happening, I have gone from feinting a right attack, theoretically from here, to throwing a left kind of Mittlehau. I call it a Mittlehau, even though it sort of takes a little bit of an angle and something that close to what you could say was just a left overhau. But I'm going to call it a Mittlehau specifically because I do two things that I think are done specifically to mess up my opponent, which is specifically go from the feinting the high right opening to go to the low left. And what that does is it creates this situation where my opponent has 3 or arguably 4 places to cover. Because they see this in the top right, they go to their high left. And theoretically, it's possible to realize right about here that something's gone wrong and to shove your hands from the right side to the left side, or sorry, in this case, their left side to their right side, and parry what would have been a high line attack. By going low, you present that third option. So now the second they realize that they've guessed wrong up on their high left and they see you coming on their right side, they have to guess high right or high left or low left. And if they try to hang and parry from this position, it's very unlikely that they'll be able to reach that low position. So that's why I throw it. The cons here, which are going to start stacking up very quickly, are that it's very difficult to rotate all the way around and get the edge in proper alignment for a Mittlehau. You can see where I land probably more than a little flat, and I instantly roll. And more importantly than that is that the second that attack lands, I have 0 defense. My opponent's arms are basically already over my blade, which means when I try to pull my blade out or go up, I have nothing. I just sort of push my sword against my opponent's arms, and the opponent basically comes down on top of my hands. And I basically do as much as physically possible to defend myself here. After I land my cut, I wind my hands up as high as they can possibly go, and it's still not nearly enough to meaningfully protect me. I've said in other videos, and it always stands true, whenever you attack low, you can almost always expect that the afterblow is coming high, because you have to generally extend further and commit more to hit low than you do to hit high. And anytime you fail a block or just attempt a block low, the high repost should always be coming next. And that's exactly what happens here. So as far as an offensive option, the pro that it has is that it's very, very confusing. The ability to feint something high and then go low is a bread and butter technique that a lot of people should use. But this is specifically the Mittlehau to the torso. Now here it does sort of work out for me. My opponent is just stuffed up enough by the defense that I throw up that this cut isn't great. And you could say that maybe they could have maybe done a little bit more to just drive that down into me and it wouldn't have really ended up the same, but that's what ended up happening. In this next example, what we have is the defensive Mittlehau. And specifically, it's going to be this person on the left throwing a defensive Mittlehau after the person on the right throws a stab. Now, the thing that, again, pros and cons of this Mittlehau, the first being that the second this stab is attempted, the person on the left does a kind of short edge deflecting blow, and they find themselves safe from the thrust, but with their sword all the way out to their right side. Now, there are a couple things that you can do. You can try to come in over the top and strike the opponent in the head, but if you watch this person here, they immediately bring their sword up because that is typically what happens. So this sort of riposte here, that which comes straight into the head, is very common and thus very easy to defend against. So instead, right after this is defended, they come low. The problem is that Mittelhau's, along with being undefended for the most part, is that in a defensive situation, you also have the problem of them being very easily stuffed. Now, you can say that this is a similar situation to the right Zwerchhau, where in order to throw a right Mittelhau, or any Mittelhau in general, your hands have to be pretty far in front of your torso, but they have to wind back pretty far behind your torso. And what that means is that there's this period from where you've either parried or you're just attacking, where your hands are all the way back and there's nothing threatening going on, and then you have to pull them all the way back across. And in that time period, if your opponent gets too close, what you've really done is you put yourself in a position where your attack can't land anywhere good, and it can't land with any good part of your sword. And you'll see that this happens sort of here. This Mittelhau comes in, and the strong, or arguably even the cross guard, is the first thing to make contact. And that's because no matter how far you try to choke your hands closer to your torso, you can't deliver a Mittelhau without your hands leading the way. And what that means is that those hands are not only a target to be hit if you're doing the offensive Mittelhau, but they're also something that can be stuffed, because if you land with your hands first, you haven't done a meaningful cut, and then all of your momentum is taken out. And as we see, that's sort of what happens here. The opponent here goes down for a block. Can't really tell where exactly it lands, but for the purposes of this, it doesn't really matter. And then this person here has to do this with their arms in order to get out of that bind. See, once you've driven your arms or your blade into your opponent with that Mittelhau, and they come closer to you, your hands get pushed into your chest. And the only way to get out of it, really, because you can't pull back any further. That's the direction you came from, and more importantly, it's the direction your opponent is going. So if you try to pull back toward your right side, there's nowhere to go. They're already there. They can continue that pressure, and they can continue to keep your hands in control. You can't go left, because going left involves dragging it across your body, and your longsword is about 3 feet long, so nobody's arms are long enough or dexterous enough to just drag 3 feet across. So the only place you can go is up. So once you've delivered your Mittelhau, your defense, just like in the previous clip, is to try to wind your hands up as high as possible. And as we saw before, it's very, very difficult to go from here, where you've made contact with your blade, and even if it's a successful Mittelhau, to then go all the way up without getting in the way of your opponent's blade. And in this particular case, they throw that little Oberhau right to the hands in that position where there is no defense possible. So to kind of sum up, Mittelhaus are great for mix-ups. If you watch certain swordfish fights, you see them all the time. But what you have to be careful of is that they need to be the afterblow. They can't be the initial action, because there are too many ways that a right Mittelhau can get bound up and stuck in the action. And what it does is it prevents you from putting up any kind of meaningful defense from the afterblow. So what you see 9 times out of 10 is whether you throw a Mittelhau as your initial action or as your first defensive action, you might land it, you might not, but what you can almost always guarantee is that the person will have an ample opportunity to come right down on your hands or on your head. All right, that's going to be it for today. If you'd like to see your own footage featured on the channel, feel free to send me an email at HEMAFightBreakdowns@gmail.com, and I hope to see you next time.